him.
I want to watch the news.
Are you making headway at least?
This is the news.
Smack-a-magob, it is time for the only news that matters on Kiss Wednesdays. And a few weeks back, I read an interview that Bruce Kulick did with Guitar World, but it's a real long interview, so this is pretty much part 2 of that interview for the only news that matters. They said, did Eric Carr's death in 1991 impact the Kiss machine much? He said, even before he got sick, Eric let things bother him. He was unhappy about his role in Kiss. It was complicated. I felt for Eric, but disagreed with his reasoning. Losing him was tough because he was a great drummer, but Eric Singer stepped in. You know, what happened to Eric Carr wasn't expected, and we didn't know he was so sick at the end of the previous tour. So we got Eric Singer, who played in Paul Stanley's solo club tour in '89. And we were sad about Eric Carr's cancer diagnosis, but had to move forward. We were committed to make revenge. I'm glad we had Eric Carr's vocals on God Gave Rock and Roll to You and had him in the video. And they said, some say God Gave Rock and Roll to You is an anthem akin to Rock and Roll All Night. He said, I agree. We had Bob Ezrin produce it after we covered Argent's old song as a test to see if we could work with him. But we completely reworked it, and Argent's version was inappropriate for Kiss. Our version was part of the Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey soundtrack, and then we committed to work with Bob for Revenge. Said, what was it like working with Bob Ezrin, who, according to Ace Frehley, can be rough on guitars? And he said, I remember there were no compromises. We had a vision, but there was some crazy times, like when I was working on a solo for Domino, I initially had the direction, put some EBO on it, doubled it and tripled it, that what I have done, then left it alone and went to lunch. When I came back, Bob said, I hate it, do it again. So they said, how did you hash it out? And he said, I didn't love that, but Bob was right. The approach was wrong. He had me use an off-the-cuff approach, and it worked. Bob always said, play with your balls, which meant play melodically, but make it tough and make it count. It wasn't always about pedals. He meant to play tough physically. That's what he meant. And they asked, would you also credit Bob for bringing Gene back to the forefront? And he said, let's be real here. Kiss is Paul and Gene's band. They made no concessions, only to each other. And that's how they work. The relationship between Gene and Paul is like a marriage. But bringing in Bob Kulick made Paul and Gene happy, which helped. And they said, how so? And he said, they both respect Ezrin, whereas when we recorded Crazy Nights, Gene hated Ron Nevison, while Paul loved him. Gene was crying during Crazy Nights, and Paul was happy, which showed in Gene's songs. But with Revenge, which showed in Gene's songs? Now, I don't think Gene's songs are good, but it's my own personal opinion. I think Gene's songs on Crazy Nights were way better than all of Paul's songs. But yeah, it's a weak album. But anyway, he says, but with Revenge, we had a case where we had Bob Ezrin, a.k.a. the Mad Professor, who had both Paul and Gene's respect. And then they ask him, as he had with Ace Frehley on Destroyer Sweet Pain, Ezrin replaced you with Dick Wagner on Every Time I Look at You. Why? Now, before I read what Bruce says, isn't it funny how they always bring up, oh, Ace had a card game, and that's why Dick Wagner had to play, because Ace wasn't there. Well, what's the excuse with this? Did Bruce have a card game? I doubt it. Anyway, this is what he said. He said, they were hurrying to finish Every Time I Look at You, but it was a holiday weekend and I wasn't around. It just so happened that Dick Wagner was. Wow, what a coincidence. And was recording in the studio next door, so they grabbed him and he played the solo. I didn't tell the story a lot in the past because I was a little hurt about not being on the track. Yeah, to me it sounds like they didn't want you on the track, not this holiday bullshit. Anyway, then he says, let me take a stab at the solo, but I had to admit what Dick did was perfect. So we left it. If you listen back to Unplugged though, you can hear that I match what Dick did. But that solo sounds like me. Dick used an ESP Explorer and harnessed what I was doing, making it seamless. That's the only lead I didn't play on the record while in Kiss. It worked, so I got over it. And then they said, well, you killed it on every other track. And he said, Revenge was a great showcase for me. It really was. The tones and the solos were on point, and the guitar choices were interesting and not remotely simple. Kiss often gets labeled as simple. But if you listen to Kiss songs, Kiss songs are anything but. So they said, can you pick an example of that? And he goes, take Unholy, for example. There's a lot of complex parts, both rhythmically and, of course, the whole lead section has a timing that's not all 4x4. That song was one I always proud of because of its complexity. But it was weird enough that I called in a Frankenstein timing because there's so much going on underneath. They asked, was the prevalence of grunge the reason Kiss overhauled their image for Revenge's promotion? And he said, it would be easy to boil it down to that, but Revenge was a heavy record, so it made sense to toughen up our image. But I don't know why we felt Revenge should have been a leather-clad looking thing with a battleship tank line, riveted metal objects behind on the cover. It felt right, I guess. And then he said, they asked, what led to Kiss going full-on grunge with Carnival of Souls? And he said, you had these young guys who looked like they could be druggies that didn't seem to care about what they looked like. Guys playing very dark, intense music. The type of stuff that doesn't make you smile or want to make out with your girlfriend in the backseat of your car. And we decided there had to be a reaction to that. And Gene was into a load of that stuff. I remember him liking Smashing Pumpkins and even Creep by Radiohead, not Motorhead. But Paul was not attracted to it, and I don't think he wanted any part of it. So they asked him how Gene and Paul broke the news that they were going to reunite with Ace and Peter. He said, Paul and Gene were comfortable with a version of Kiss with Eric and me in it. They couldn't kill it unless they felt the reunion would last. When they told us, they said, we're not letting you go. We aren't sure if this is going to work. We aren't going to put Carnival of Souls out right away. We'll finish it for the label, but we'll tour with Ace and Peter. And they said, how did you take it? He goes, I knew that day would come, but Eric Singer was devastated. Paul and Gene did the right thing by keeping us on salary for a year, but they had to do that because they could go back if the reunion blew up. But once success came and Ace and Peter did their job, the writing was on the wall. And I've always looked at it as I was never fired from Kiss. I was left behind for a widely successful commercial venture. You don't have to be an accountant to understand Paul and Gene. With Kiss, what Kiss would make with Eric and me was like $5 million. But with Ace and Peter, we're talking netting $50 million. That's truly obscene. They asked him, when you look back on your era of Kiss, what stands out? And he says, We preserved the 80s, had Paul steering the ship while Gene was detached, yet writing better songs than Paul, in my opinion. But it wasn't as one-sided as it's made out to be, as they have always competed, with each other. And I've learned so much from them about the Kiss way. And then in the 90s, musically speaking, we were as good as any Kiss era. And they said, as good as the 70s? And he said, absolutely. I've heard Gene pick on Alive 3, for example. But it's a load of shit. It's like, dude, give me a break. We were killing it then. Here's the truth about the 80s and 90s. We could play the old shit right. We played the new shit right. I'm not saying we had the magic of the original band. No, you sure didn't. But don't put that era down because you're trying to sell the makeup. I've always said that was bullshit. I don't think you've always said that, Bruce. I think you're saying it now that Kiss is over. I never heard you say anything even close to, that's a load of shit, Gene, before. Anyway, he said, I also don't buy Paul putting down some of the stuff. He was there. He sang his heart out. He worked hard on it. Is Paul entitled to his opinion? Of course. But to reduce an era to nothing? I don't buy it. We preserved and we had made it out on the other side, given a chance. It wasn't grunge that killed that era. It was the reunion tour. All right, there you go. That's the end of the Bruce Kulick interview. And yeah, Paul has a tendency of being a Monday morning quarterback. Back when the Elder was new, he loved it. He praised it. Now as years go by, and even Carnival of Souls, you can look it up on YouTube. They did a radio interview, Gene and Paul, to promote Carnival of Souls. And Paul was all up his ass, man. Then later became a Monday morning quarterback. Like, nope, nothing to do with it. But yeah, Bruce did good on Revenge, man. I may not be a fan of Revenge. I think it's probably the most overrated Kiss album, along with Paul Stanley's 78 solo album. I feel that album is grossly overrated. But I'm talking overrated to the Kiss Army, But, it's my opinion. My opinion does not apply to you people that love both those albums. Keep loving them, and you're right for loving them. And yeah, Kiss Alive 3, musically, the band was super tight. But again, there's something about that album, and I've tried. I do like how they played Deuce on that album. I think that was a good version of Deuce. As good as Kiss Alive version? No. But it's a good version of Deuce. But yeah, the thing is, man, you listen to Kiss Alive, and that was like, man, it was like a band like almost falling off the cliff. It's just so raw and killer. I know it was re-recorded except for Peter Chris's part. All that is live, but still, even going back to the studio to touch shit up, it still has that magic, that organic nature magic that, it's a band that's teetering on fucking up, but gets through it. Where the Kiss Alive 3 version, that's perfection. Too spot on for me. And that's the problem I had with Scab Kiss too. With Tommy and Eric Singer. They played way too perfect. It took away the charm of Ace and Peter. I just felt like, to me, man, I like the organic nature. I don't care if it's perfect or not, as long as it speaks to my soul. And Original Kiss totally spoke to my soul. But hey, what do you all think of Alive 3 and Carnival of Souls, Revenge, and so on? And this whole thing, what he's talking about. Please leave it in the comments below. And by the way, Bruce was fired. That was what my last report was, but he mentions it again here, how they didn't fire him. They just went on to better things without him. That's called fired here on planet Earth. But anyway, thank you all for watching The Only News That Matters. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't. Ring that little notification bell. And make sure you're still subscribed to my channel if you did subscribe, because people are getting unsubscribed for no reason, and that fucking sucks. So please, 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 subscribe again. Or just subscribe if it's your first time, and like the video, because that's really good for the YouTube algorithms. So stay frosty, listen to Black Sabbath, and smack 'em a gob.
Farewell and adieu to you fair Spanish ladies. Farewell and adieu, you ladies of Spain. For we've received orders for to sail back to Boston. And so nevermore shall we see you again.